over 400,000 professionals in over 154 countries, Deloitte has a pulse on what's happening around the world like probably no other organization has. And to talk about that pulse, about the world and India within that world, we have two distinguished gentlemen with us on BQ Prime on the sidelines of the WAF at Davos. Mr. Joe Ucuzoglu, who is Global CEO of Deloitte, and N Venkatram, CEO of Deloitte India. Incidentally, Joe took over as Deloitte's Global CEO this month starting 1st Jan. So, Joe, at the outset, congratulations, and to you and Venkat, thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you for that. Great to be with you.
Thank you. And I'll have some questions about what your priorities are towards the end of this conversation. But can I start off, Joe, by asking you, how do you feel about the world at the point of time from your landscape, considering that the Western Hemisphere is going through the throes of a slowdown? Could this be a protracted one? Is it even possible to predict that?
Well, I like the way you ended the question around prediction. One thing that hopefully all of us have learned the past few years is that making predictions is a fool's errand.
Yes.
And what you see here this week in Davos is mixed sentiments. On the one hand, there is a recognition that it is a choppier economic environment we're in, that will probably be one of the big storylines throughout 2023, and not trying to predict exactly what that means, whether it's recession in this part of the world or that part of the world, but certainly a more complicated economic environment. Now, on the other hand, there are a lot of reasons for optimism. You see people embracing the full promise of technology. You see an alignment around the imperative of addressing climate and decarbonizing the economy. And so there are some really positive long-term signals, irrespective of some short-term economic worry.
The theme that the WEF has chosen is cooperation in a fragmented world.
Yeah.
Now, we know since 2022, if you will, central banks are not exactly acting in unison. Countries are probably turning more inwards. If anything, it's fairly fragmented. Do you believe cooperation and in this slowing growth period is possible in such a disjointed world, so to say?
Most of these issues that humanity faces are not unique to a particular geography.
True.
And we have to find ways to come together. So is there increased geopolitical tension and some level of decoupling? Yes. Is there some level of growing nationalism and populism in pockets of the world? Yes. But you still see here a general sentiment that humanity wants to come together. Humanity wants to coexist and find ways to work together that are productive and ultimately lift everyone.
Yeah, sure. Now, just before I get Venkat in, just one more follow-up here. How are you advising clients on the geopolitical tensions? Because I'm sure it's a conversation across boardrooms about what's happening right now, Russia, Ukraine, but almost every other geopolitical issue that comes up for CEOs who are deciding to invest in supply chains across the world.
There's a couple dimensions. So the word I would use above all else is agility. And that goes for so many dimensions of the environment that we're in. It's really hard to make predictions. The spectrum of potential outcomes is greater than it's ever been. And so we're advising clients to look at a range of scenarios, to go through the exercise of understanding what are the different ways that these things might play out and ensure that they have readiness plans in place for each of them.
Okay. Interesting. And it'll be lovely to see as well how do these things shape up over the course of the year as well. But let me get Venkat in on this conversation. Venkat, similar question to you really, and more from an India focus as well, because Deloitte has continued to grow in India, but I'm sure even for Indian CEOs who are expanding globally, investing everywhere across the world, how high is the confidence, one? And what do they feel about the stress around growth and geopolitics around the world?
Thank you, and a pleasure being with you today.
Thank you.
Albeit the temperature is a little
It's freezing.
freezing. I think when you look at all the surveys, whether that's done by Deloitte or any of the other firms, Indian CEOs are very optimistic.
Yeah.
I rely more on individual conversations as well. And I would believe that the vast majority of us truly believe that this is India's century, that there's a lot of growth ahead of us. And I think that was also confirmed by the Economist survey yesterday at Davos, that South Asia is the area of growth. And so therefore, what they are really looking at is to say, if you are looking at exports, if you're in technology, it's very comfortable. If you're a multinational, you're also looking at ways in which you can do more work out of India. And this is not just offshoring. This is also research, development, design, and a host of other things. So I think whether it's the MNCs or whether it is the Indian companies, I think all of them are very bullish.
Is it an Indian speaking, or do you agree that it's India century as well, Joe?
Look, we're incredibly bullish on India.
Okay.
And India is core to the entirety of Deloitte's global strategy. It is maturing as a professional services market at an accelerated pace. And the needs of these organizations as they scale and as the economy grows at rates that are frankly far greater than the rate of the global economy as a whole, the need for high-end professional services like we deliver is growing significantly. And it's an incredibly important source of talent. Talent that, as Venkat shared, this isn't simply about offshoring. This is about heart of the business, high-end, exceptional skills, grounded in the tech revolution that we're all experiencing, tapping into that wealth of resources to serve our clients around the world.
Yeah, most certainly. And I that will be an increased thing as well. Indians sitting in India, fine, but serving the world as well. How has been the Deloitte experience around the single biggest issue of talent that a lot of service-led firms are facing around the world, from the great resignation to what's happened with the Indian IT firms as well, to maybe your own firm?
Well, I think that, this is the country which produced RRR. And the big R is resilience. I think India did prove that we were extremely resilient through the pandemic.
Sure.
We were also very responsive. And broadly, across the board, I think all Indian companies did well even during the pandemic. They took care of the people, most importantly. The care, the commitment they showed the people, and the very fact that most of us did zero layoffs, I think was a very, very big story. And then, as you know, after that, the hybrid working has come in. Particularly on the technology side, there's been a huge amount of recruitment. And generally, therefore, I think the sentiment is that we will maintain a certain amount of flexibility with the workforce. We acknowledge that hybrid working is here for some time, but we have to look at new ways in which we re-energize work and reinvent work, workforce, and workplace. And a lot of that thought is coming out of India to the world. It's also probably recognized with the fact that so many of our global CEOs are of Indian descent.
Yeah, most certainly. Actually, Venkat, from chip making to electronics to even chocolate making, right? A lot of investments happening in India. Now, just before the interview started, we were talking about the need for investments into the country. We were talking to Eknath Shinde, the CM of Maharashtra yesterday. He said that in 2 days, they have signed MOUs worth 1.5 crore rupees. And I'm guessing Tamil Nadu and some of the other states might have similar experiences. What's your view on investments into India from global companies? What's the chatter in amongst Deloitte clients as well?
Would you like to start with me or with Joe?
With you first, and then I'll go to Joe.
Look, I look at it through a couple of lenses.
Uh-huh.
Let me start with the easiest one, which is the amount of innovation that takes place in India and the number of unicorns we have. I think the startup revolution in India is something we can write textbooks about. It's fantastic. We've created so many unicorns, and we've brought in a lot of investment into that. So I think investment in innovation, investment in our startup community is going to continue. I do certainly also think that industry and business should look at where government wants to make an impact and grow with that. So we can also look in terms of climate related and what we need to do and bring in investments for that. We can look at clean energy. We look at green hydrogen. There are so many new areas where we should be looking at doing things. The third is because of the fragility in global. We've got to look at supply chains, global supply chains. And there again, my view is it's not a question of competing and trying to replace someone else. There's so much new technology.
True.
There's EVs, there's batteries, there's semiconductor again, and the reform that's taking place in that area. These are the areas where we will continue to invest. Now, the challenge is other countries have the same plan, and they're also putting huge amounts of money into it.
Precisely.
So I think it's got to be a collective investment by both the government, the private sector, the fact that I think from a household perspective, we are comfortable in the savings front, as well as an enormous amount of FDI. Remember, to reach 5 trillion, we need 8 trillion of capital formation. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, you reckon that
it requires
we have a fighting chance?
Of course.
We
It's
do.
more than a fighting chance.
Okay, no,
And
I'm
I
getting
think-
the investments, I mean,
Yeah.
not
Oh,
about
sorry, in
reaching the
getting the
target.
investment?
Yeah.
Well, in getting the investment, I think An important part is trust. India has built a lot of trust significantly over the last few years. I don't think anybody doubts performance, the fact that they can do well, the size of the domestic market and all tells you all, but they need stability.
Sure.
So when you bring investment in, you've got to give people the time to work out their plans, give them stability on taxes, which we are demonstrating, don't have anything retrospective, which we have demonstrated. And there'll be a host, this is a long laundry list. I mean,
Sure.
industry will keep coming up with other things they want from the government. And I think the government is also quite positive on trying to ease business. And I think the more we can demonstrate that you can trust us, you can come here for the long term and get your returns for your shareholders, the more the money will come.
Okay, Joe, all through your times and now as the global head as well, and you don't have to say a yes to make us argumentative Indians feel good, but do you believe the chatter around India is probably the loudest or amongst the loudest that you would have heard for making investments into the country, or not really?
Very much so.
Very much so. Okay.
And you've got a confluence of factors. You have a recognition that India is a hub of innovation. You have a recognition that India is a wealth of talent that is skilled in the areas that are in highest demand. And you do have a pretty concerted effort amongst global businesses to look at diversifying their supply chains, to build in resilience, a recognition that we are coming off of a multi-decade period of so tightly tuning these chains with tremendous benefits in terms of efficiency, in terms of bringing price points down. But the events of the past few years have demonstrated that in some cases, these have not been calibrated to withstand shocks, whether it be a pandemic, a war in Ukraine, and a realization that ultimately supply chains are going to have to be rebalanced to prioritize resilience, and India will absolutely be one of the beneficiaries.
From a global viewpoint, what could be the Achilles heel for India, you reckon?
Corporations want stability. They want predictability. They want to understand they're operating in an environment where they know the rules and they're not going to change overnight. You referenced we can't have things being imposed retroactively.
Sure.
They want peace and geopolitical stability and an understanding that there aren't going to be conflagrations that ultimately cause disruption to their own supply chains. And so the more that there's a demonstration of stability and predictability, the greater you'll see the confidence build in India relative to the long term.
Great. I have a last couple of questions. I know it's freezing here, but last 2 or 3 questions, sorry, if you will. Venkat, to you first. Could this be a B2B decade for India? Traditionally, the last 2 have been a B2C decade. People came to India for India's consumers. Can it be a different thing right now, manufacturing?
I think it has to be. It's not just about services. It's not just about exports. It's equally about domestic. And most importantly, when you look at a rising rupee, a weakening rupee and the rising dollar in that sense, import substitution is also important. So when you look at new corridors we're opening, whether it's defense, whether it's space, a lot of this is also technology led. And a lot of the technology is also from India. Okay. So I think that you will find a lot of the multinationals will come into India, and a lot of our own domestic companies' growth, the groups in India will grow with this interface of what we call Industry 4.0, the confluence of and the intersection of business and technology.
Okay.
And there again, if you combine that with talent, which we spoke about earlier, the fact that you have talent and technology and the potential for trade, the 3 T's, I think we have it all. Today I'm into the alphabets.
Completely fine. Let me ask you one more question. You mentioned the startup culture. There's a lot of talk around how the SME space and the unorganized space has really not come up to the fore post-pandemic. And at the same time, you have a very vibrant startup culture, probably the most number of startups registered in the last 1 year next to the US, if you will. Where is the dichotomy here? I mean, the startups are small, these guys are small, they are not able to do it, but the startups are able to mushroom, so to say.
It's interesting that you think of the dichotomy because I look at it differently. I say the very fact that startups can do well in India means we have an ease of doing business.
Sure.
We could not have had the ease of doing business. We could not have had these young people deciding to put their own money and being able to attract a little more investment at later stages. On the MSMEs itself, I think to your earlier point, on the growth of India, and when I look at import substitution, when I look at foreign companies coming into India, they will look at their supply ecosystem. Sure. They will bring the quality parameters. They will look at the network of suppliers around them, and this is really where the MSMEs, the medium and small enterprises, Joe, come in. And I think what we have to learn there from these family and small enterprises is that lending was very tight during the pandemic. And what all our bankers tell us is that now lending has eased. In addition to that, there is another very, very important development that we sometimes tend to discount. And that is that in our country, the government is spending a lot on what we call the India stack. Whether it is UID, which is, I would say, created complete financial inclusion. And more recently, they're looking in terms of the credit network, the distribution network. When all this comes, it will benefit the medium and small sector as well. So I think with that combination, we are winning.
Neighbors envy, owners pride, maybe. Let me try. I didn't have alphabets, but I thought I'll put in something as well. Okay. Now, to you, what is the message, or what is the, I won't say an agenda, but what is it that you're looking forward to over the course of the next 2-3 days at Davos from a Deloitte perspective?
This is a special place in terms of the concentration of leaders from around the world, and to be able to have aligned conversations around the most important priorities, around the pace of technology adoption. And you see the conversation around AI and all that's being fed by migration to the cloud, availability of large volumes of data, increasingly sophisticated applications, taking that data, feeding AI engines. This is going to transform industries. The conversation around climate. A lot of people were skeptical and thought that when the world hit some speed bumps, that we would see companies retract their commitments. The opposite has happened. And in part because people have been personally impacted. They're seeing the consequences of climate change. They're seeing these extraordinary weather events. They're redoubling their commitment to be part of the solution. And you really don't have any parallel throughout the course of the year relative to bringing together so many leaders and influencers who have the ability to drive change and talk about these core issues all in one place. So it's going to be a great week.
Okay. Final question. As the new head of Deloitte globally, what are the priorities that you have laid out, or what are the things that you want to do? Workplace related, employee, talent related, organization related? Tell us a bit about it.
Yes, and yes. Deloitte is all about making an impact. And we find ourselves in this unique position where these issues that our clients are facing are more and more complicated, and they require multidisciplinary thinking. They require coming at these issues through different lenses. Usually there are strategy dimensions, there are technology dimensions, there are change management dimensions, there's issues around regulatory compliance and global taxation and reporting accurately to the markets. Like, all of those things have to come together, and Deloitte is uniquely positioned as the one organization that has the ability to actually do that in an integrated, value-driven process to ultimately create outcomes for clients. So we're very bullish relative to the role that we will play in helping clients navigate a lot of these complexities.
Well, for all of those and in your new role, wishing you all the best, Joe. Thank you for talking to us today.
Thanks for having us. This was fantastic.
And Venkat, for India's role in what is arguably India's century, to you as well for leading Deloitte India Hire, wishing you all the best.
Thank you so much.
A pleasure talking to you, gentlemen, today.
Pleasure.
And viewers, thanks for tuning in.